And the truth is, our internal resistance will always limit our external influence. Your internal resistance will set the ceiling for your team's growth. Legacy leaders don't just adapt to change, they lead it with clarity and compassion. They know themselves, lead themselves, and multiply that health into every area of their life.
This is the Live, Lead, Last podcast.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Live, Lead, Last podcast. I'm James Duvall, and this episode is brought to you by Pharmanex. You know, one of the things that's always frustrated me is knowing I should be supplementing my health, but with so many options out there, who actually knows what's really helpful? But recently I started taking LifePak anti-aging formula supplements by Pharmanex, and I've really been impressed. It's a comprehensive formula that supports everything from cardiovascular and immune health to your antioxidant network and mental performance. I've also paired it with Pharmanex's AgeLock R2 Vitality. Now, as someone who regularly is out on my bike racking up miles, I've noticed a real difference in my energy, recovery, and overall performance. So if you're interested in trying some new supplements, you can check out both products using the link in the show notes. Also, before we get started, if you're a leader looking for clarity and momentum, I want to invite you to do a 5-day leadership reset. It's a free resource I put together to help you refocus and realign your leadership in just 5 intentional days. So each day you'll receive an email from me with a video teaching and a few applications that immediately put the learning into action. You can start your reset today at liveleadlast.com/reset. Today we're talking about one of the hardest realities of leadership. We're talking about change. As George Bernard Shaw once said, progress is impossible without change. And we know that's true. So I want to talk today about why change can be so difficult, how to know when it's necessary, and then some tools that you can use to navigate change well. So if you're ready, let's dive in. So I want to start with this question. Why is change so difficult at times? We all know that change is uncomfortable, right? It shakes our routines, it pokes at our identity, and as leaders, it often means asking others to come along with us on the journey that we ourselves aren't entirely sure about yet. And if we're honest, change exposes stuff below the surface. And if we aren't healthy, if we're leading from fear or leading from insecurity or ego, then change can actually feel like a threat instead of an invitation. You know, one of my disciplines is to keep a file of quotes that inspire me or challenge me. And I've tagged them by topic. So when I'm talking about a subject, I can kind of look up that topic and see if anything hits me. And I came across this quote from Fred Swaniker, a serial entrepreneur and leadership development expert, who said, "Every now and then we come to a fork in the road that requires us to either stay on the current life path or change course and do something radically different." And that's true, right? We've all been there. And if you're similar to me, you've probably resisted the change, not because it wasn't needed, but because it made you feel uncertain. I know I've actually delayed conversations I knew I should have. I've clung to old strategies that once worked, even when they no longer fit the current reality. Why? Because I didn't take the time to assess what was actually going on underneath the surface. Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said, if we don't change the direction we're going, we are likely to end up where we're headed. And that's so true, right? And if we're not careful, where we're headed could end up being a dead end. So let me ask you, what's going on at the root level of your leadership? What fears or tendencies are influencing how you respond to change? Are those the things that are keeping you from initiating the change that is so needed in your personal life or in your organization you're leading, maybe in the relationships around you? If so, we need to deal with those things so we can move forward in a positive way. So how do we actually recognize when change is needed? You know, great leaders recognize the signs before they become crisis. I once heard Dr. John Maxwell teach that leaders see farther and they see faster than others. So as leaders, we actually have to look out beyond today to identify signs in ourselves or in our organization. Now, these can include if the culture is maybe growing cynical, if people are disengaging, maybe our own joy is diminishing. Wow. I don't know if you've been there, but I've been there when the reality you find yourself in is just not enjoyable anymore. The passion's gone. Those are not just problems. Those are actually signals that something needs to change. You know, a tool that I often use when I'm coaching leaders is the change equation tool. And it says this: change only happens when the product of 3 things is greater than resistance. And those three things are dissatisfaction with the current reality, vision for what could be, and first steps to get there. So let me break this down. So dissatisfaction with the current reality. Let me ask you, are you and your team deeply dissatisfied with the status quo? Some internal cues of dissatisfaction could include things like persistent restlessness, maybe a low-grade sense of unease or frustration, even when things appear fine externally. Maybe there's a lack of fulfillment, accomplishing goals, but still feeling empty or disconnected from a deeper purpose. Maybe you've dealt with mental fatigue or monotony, or feeling bored, under-challenged, or stuck in a routine with no growth or innovation. Those are all signals, signs that maybe there's some internal dissatisfaction going on. And then there's external signs that reflect internal dissatisfaction. Maybe there's increased irritability or cynicism, a shorter patience, maybe more critical of team or leadership structures. Maybe there's withdrawal from strategic conversations or pulling back from vision casting, decision-making, or collaborative leadership. You could also actually be avoiding long-term planning. These are all signals or signs of dissatisfaction with the status quo. And then the V is vision for a better future. Do you have a compelling vision of a better future? What would better actually look like? Can you describe it? Maybe not in detail, but in generalities. Do you know what better would feel like? That you would be more fulfilled, more happy, more joyful. All those things are the vision of a better future. And then finally is the first steps to get there. Can you identify the first few clear steps to begin moving towards the change you need? If any of these are missing, resistance wins. But when all three are strong, even the most resistant cultures can begin to move forward. Now, Dr. John Maxwell in his book, Change Your World, outlines this reality well. He says that people change when the hurt that they have is great enough that they have to, they see enough that they're inspired to, and they learn enough that they want to, and finally they receive enough that they're able to. See, this helps us realize that not all change is driven by the same fuel. Sometimes it's pain, sometimes it's inspiration, sometimes it's information or opportunity. Our job is to discern the catalyst. But in order to leverage the change equation, we have to actually recognize and name the resistance to change. Because most resistance isn't just intellectual, it's emotional, it's relational, and often it's rooted in past experiences. Resistance shows up in different ways. But for today's conversation, we're going to put it in three big buckets: barriers, hurdles, and gaps. Barriers can stop us in our tracks. These are often deep-seated or systemic, like a lack of trust in leadership or the process, maybe past failure that created emotional scar tissue, fear of loss, whether it's control, status, or comfort. These are heavy and immovable without direct intervention. You don't just coach these away. You have to name them and deal with them directly. Now, hurdles are different. They're real, but they can be cleared with effort and support. For example, someone may feel left out of the decision and just needs to be heard. Another may be uncertain about how they fit into the change. These people aren't saying no, they're saying, I'm not sure how. Okay, then there's gaps. These are the things that are simply missing. A gap in communication, no one has clearly explained the why. A gap in value, people don't see how the change benefits them or the mission. And maybe a gap in vision. They don't know where this is going or what success looks like. And here's the thing. Knowing the category of resistance helps you lead with empathy, not just authority. But as leaders, it's our job to tune into the underlying reason behind resistance. And that doesn't mean we always change their direction, but it does mean that we lead with support, not just a push. And let's not forget, resistance isn't just out there in others. Most oftentimes, the deepest resistance shows up in us as leaders. When we face personal change, whether it's shifting our mindset, breaking a habit, or stepping into a new role, we actually encounter the same three buckets of resistance internally. Barriers inside of us can sound like, I've tried before and failed. And that past failure becomes a wall. Or maybe it sounds like, I don't have time, where busyness becomes a built-in excuse. Or it could sound like, this is just who I am. And that limiting belief masquerades as identity. See, these inner barriers need more than motivation. They need rewiring, reflection, and sometimes even help from a coach or a counselor. Now, hurdles within us are more like self-doubt. What if I'm not capable? Maybe fear of change. What will others think? Or maybe emotional fatigue. I'm tired of trying, right? These are real, but they can be overcome with support, accountability, and small wins. And then gaps within us might include lack of clarity. We might be asking, what am I actually aiming for? Lack of skills. Maybe we're saying, I don't know how to lead this kind of change. Or lack of vision. I'm not sure why this even matters. As leaders, we often help others identify these things, but rarely take the time to slow down and examine our own internal resistance. And here's the truth. The leader's internal resistance often sets the ceiling for the team's growth. Let me say this again. Your internal resistance will set the ceiling for your team's growth. So when we address our barriers, clear out our hurdles, and close our own gaps, we model what change really looks like. Plutarch once said, what we achieve inwardly will change outer reality. So we have to understand, more often than not, the greatest barrier isn't out there, it's in us. You know, one of the most meaningful experiences my wife Lisa and I have shared was on our very first trip to London. We both dreamed of visiting, but we didn't realize just how much we would fall in love with the city, its history, its architecture, its energy. But one of our favorite places, hands down, that first visit was the Churchill War Rooms. If you've never been there, it's the underground bunker where Winston Churchill and his team ran the war effort during World War II. Now, what blew us away is that everything is still intact. The maps, the phones, the desks, even the sleeping quarters. It's like stepping into a time capsule. Now, behind the war rooms is this incredible Churchill Museum, and I'll never forget walking through it, learning about his life, his struggles, and the weight he carried as a leader in crisis. Now, that day I learned a lot about leadership and even more about what it means to face resistance and step into personal change. You know, when Winston Churchill became prime minister in 1940, Britain was in full crisis mode. Early battles had been lost, the nation feared invasion, political leaders were divided. Churchill knew strategy wasn't enough. He had to shift his own leadership. So he stopped trying to make everyone feel comfortable and started painting a vivid vision of resilience and resolve. You can hear it in this statement. He said, "To each to all I say, you cannot tell whether Hitler will loosen his grip or not. You can only prepare to meet him." See, that wasn't just a powerful line. That was a leadership pivot. He stepped into the change equation whether he realized it or not. See, there was dissatisfaction, the threat of destruction and loss. There was a vision of the future, victory at all costs. And there were first steps, mobilizing every available resource, both military and civilian. Churchill didn't wait for everyone to agree. He modeled the change and then called others into it. You know, sometimes resistance we face isn't from others, it's from within. And as leaders, we often coach people through change, but avoid facing our own. And the truth is, our internal resistance will always limit our external influence. So what does this mean for us? If we want to leave a lasting impact, if we want to multiply our influence, then we must become change-ready leaders. So if there's something in your business, your relationships, or something in yourself that needs to change, there's no better time than the present to push against the resistance and initiate change. Here are a few questions to ask yourself. Where in my 5 circles of influence is change most needed? Is it in myself, in my family, in my team, the organization, maybe in the community? Secondly, what's the first small step that I can take this week? What's that actionable thing that I can start moving into a better future? And then who do I need to bring into the conversation to overcome resistance? You know, having a support structure around you when you're going through change is really helpful. Maybe it's your team, maybe it's your spouse, maybe you need to bring on a coach that's just going to help you take the next step in that journey to change. One of my book mentors is the late, great Jim Rohn, and there are 2 statements of his that come to mind when I think about change. The first is, you cannot change your destination overnight, but you can change your direction overnight. And the second thing he says is this: any day we wish, we can discipline ourselves to change it all. I want to leave you with this. Legacy leaders don't just adapt to change. They lead it with clarity and compassion. They know themselves, lead themselves, and multiply that health into every area of their life. So take a moment today and evaluate your own change equation. What's strong? What's missing? And thanks so much for joining me today on the Live, Lead, Last podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast and follow the show so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. And if this content resonated with you, would you share it with a friend or teammate? It will help me get the word out about the podcast. Also, if you want to go deeper in your personal and leadership growth, I'd love to have you on my weekly email list. It's a curated resource packed with tools, insights, and practices that help you live with clarity, lead with purpose, and last with intentional impact. So just text the word GROW, that's GROW, to the number 66866 to get started. I'd also love to connect with you on Instagram and LinkedIn. I'd love to hear your story and keep the conversation going. Until next time, live with intention, lead with integrity, and never settle for less than lasting impact.